Welcome back to the Rule the Wasteland podcast. This is the Lord Humongous, aka Eric. The topic I wanted to talk about today is something that I've covered in a lot of my videos in the past, but the problem is I've only really covered or endorsed one aspect or one choice that you have on the matter, and I think that's really doing a disservice to everyone out there. I've done it unintentionally because it's kind of the way that I do things, and so I've kind of promoted it as being the better way of doing it because I've decided that for my particular situation it has been, at least in the past. But I'll talk about why that might be changing in the future and basically just give you a brief rundown of both sides of the story and the pros and cons of each and why you might choose one way or the other. And so if you're getting a little curious, the topic is storing food, and specifically what I consider the two major options for your food storage method. Obviously, you can mix and match within these, but people typically prefer one or the other, and maybe a little bit of crossover, but not much. Usually it comes down to your personal prepping goals, your plan, and specifically whether you view yourself as a prepper and kind of have that lifestyle, or if you don't and really aren't interested in prepping at all and just want to be prepared, you're going to do things a little differently. So the two options that I've generally identified that you have when it comes to food storage are the eat what you store what you eat model, which is what I normally talk about and is what I'm currently using, and then what I'd like to call the Ronco, or the set it and forget it model of food storage, which is traditionally store or a commercially packaged long-term storage food that you would just buy, cram away somewhere. You figure out how much you want, 6 months, a year, whatever. You buy that in a commercially packaged long-term storage foods, store it in a closet or somewhere, and then just forget about it. Never mess with it again until you would need it for some sort of shit hit the fan scenario. On the other end of the spectrum, what a lot of preppers do is the store what you eat what you store, which is you take stuff that you eat on a normal day-to-day basis and you store a lot extra of it, and you rotate through it. So when you need something, you go into your storeroom instead of going to the grocery store and take the oldest of it out of there, like the oldest can of green beans or whatever, and use that. And then when you go to the store, you buy another can of green beans to replace it, and then use that last. So it's like a FIFO, first in, first out system, which allows you to use things that don't need to have quite as long of a shelf life because you're rotating through it, but you still have to have things that have that are non-perishable. Typically, you're not going to be using a lot of fresh fruits and vegetables. So I'm going to go through both methods of food storage, go through the pros and the cons, so you can decide for yourself which one would really be better for what you're going for and for your particular situation. So the first up would be eat what you store what you eat. Now the pros of this method, and the main pro, is that it's a lot cheaper. Because you're just going to be buying commercially available food mostly from the grocery store, sometimes from Sam's and stuff like that, but you're not going to be buying from like survival outlets and stuff like that. The stuff's going to be cheaper, because it doesn't have to be packaged specially or anything. You're talking about canned goods, you're talking about dry goods, stuff that's packaged in pouches and everything, like tuna. So all this stuff will last at least a few years for the most part, and it's pretty damn cheap, especially when compared to other survival-type long-term food stores. But even when compared to other types of grocery store foods, the stuff that you would normally use in an eat what you store what you eat setup is cheaper. And it's fairly healthy. When you talk about canned goods, oatmeal, rice, beans, canned vegetables, stuff like that, there's not the most unhealthy food that you could get out of a grocery store, that's for sure. And it's not going to be as healthy as all fresh stuff, but it's a hell of a lot more healthy than the average American diet. Another advantage, so it's much cheaper over the long term. Another advantage is there's no waste, or very little waste. You don't have to get rid of anything unless something gets damaged or, tainted somehow, but you're just cycling through it. So you're not waiting until the stuff expires and then throwing it away. You're using this stuff all the time in your day-to-day life, so you just use what's oldest in there and then buy more. So there's a constant amount there, but it's never the same individual item. So there may be 50 cans of green beans in your storeroom always, but it's not the same 50 cans. So none of them are more than a few years old. And so that saves you from having to throw anything out unless there's damage or anything like that. Another big pro, and this is probably the third biggest pro, I have three major pros. Obviously, there's little things depending on your situation which may be good or bad, but these are ones that typically apply to everyone. The third is you don't have to change your diet if you have to get into your food stores. So if for some reason you have something like a job loss or other things, like maybe you're just really tight with money that month and you want to get into your food stores, you don't have to do anything differently. It's not a big deal. You don't have to wait for an apocalypse to justify digging in a little bit to your food stores. You just eat what you would on a normal day-to-day basis, and you just don't replace it as quickly until you have the opportunity. Whereas if you had, commercially stored foods in 5-gallon buckets, you can't just bust into one of those to get a week's worth of extra food to save a few bucks when you have a car repair or something like that. So you have to change the way that you're doing on a day-to-day basis if you're going to use the stores, which you wouldn't have to do if you're storing what you eat and eating what you store. So that can be a major advantage for some people. Now, the cons of okay, so just to reiterate before we go on, the pros are cheaper, no waste, and you don't have to change your diet if you have to break into your food stores. But there are some negatives, obviously, as there are with anything, with this method of food storage. The first one is, these aren't necessarily any kind of hierarchy, it's just random order. You must eat foods with a shelf life of at least, 6 months to a year or whatever, depending on how often you go through it. So you're not going to be able to eat a lot of, or certainly not as much as you could, fresh foods, fresh meats, stuff like that. Even frozen stuff. You have to go with stuff that has a shelf life is typically considered non-perishable. So you're really not going to have many things in your day-to-day diet, or at least not in any significant quantities, that have a shelf life of less than 6 months to a year. So that can be a big negative for some people who like to eat fresh fruits, eat a lot of meat, because the options for stored meats are just crap. They don't taste good, and they're fairly expensive as well. Maybe cheaper than buying really good steaks or something, but it's not the cheapest forms of meat you can buy is the stored stuff, and it certainly doesn't taste as good. Another negative is it takes more space because everything's, packaged individually in like a can or something, or a pouch, instead of in a giant bucket or a barrel or a number 10 can. It does take a lot more space to store this stuff. You typically have to have shelving to where you can get access to it, or storage that you can get access to frequently, since you will be rotating through it. You can't have it buried under other storage or tucked away in a garage or somewhere. It has to be easily accessible, so that takes a little more space there, or at least a little more usable space. It's a lot more of a pain in the ass to put under your bed or something like you could with long-term stored foods, simply because you have to get at it more frequently since you're rotating through it. So that will take more space and more logistics and stuff like shelving and, just a better, more regimented plan that you would need to use pretty regularly. So that can take a lot more work. That's the next point. It's more work and management. So you have more space, and then you have more work and management. So not only do you have to take up more space, and usually prime space in your house, because it has to be places that you can get in and out of easily and frequently, you also takes a lot of work and management. I mean, not a lot of work, but certainly more than the other option, to keep track of what's the oldest, to swap the stuff out when you get it, make sure you don't let stuff go to waste. You have to be tracking all this stuff, and keep more of like a running inventory than a one-time figure out what you need and go buy it like you would with the other method. So you probably have to have some sort of rotating can shelves. You probably have to have some sort of spreadsheet or some sort of roster, like a printed out roster or something like that lists everything that you have and has dates on there and stuff like that if you really want to stay on top of it. And that can be a big downside to a lot of people if they're not into prepping or preparedness, if they really just aren't interested in it, but they do recognize the necessity of it, but they just want to have something that they can sock away and forget about it. That's going to be a big downside. The fact that you have to have stuff that's sort of more visible and takes a lot more management to stay on top of and not let stuff waste. So that brings us to our next option, which is what I call the Ronco, which is a brand of made for TV kitchen appliances, and they had the one guy, I think it was Ron Popeil's stuff, and he had the set it and forget it, like rotisserie thing. So that's why I call this, because this is a set it and forget it style of food storage. And that is, you make your plan of what you're going to need and for how long, and then you go out there and you find the stuff that has a really long shelf life and meets all the nutrition requirements and calorie requirements for what you need. You buy it, you cram it away somewhere where you don't have to look at it, and then you move on with your life. And you only ever have to do anything ever again if A, the shit hits the fan, or B, you get to the end of the shelf life and you either swap the stuff out, try to use it near the end or whatever, and just buy more. So the pro is it's the least amount of work. You can get away with doing almost nothing. You can take maybe a few hours of research, maybe a full day, a couple days worth of research, depending on how much you already know about your situation and what you're trying to do, and a few hours of research, and then go buy what you need, and you're done for possibly for a few decades, unless something changes in your life, new family members, some sort of nutrition requirement or allergies or something like that. But it definitely takes the least amount of work of pretty much any other food storage method. Another pro is it takes less space for two reasons. Number one, because you can get stuff in bigger containers, 5-gallon buckets, number 10 cans, big bags, stuff like that. You just pack it and put it away, so it takes up less space. And you can put it places where you don't have to get to often, so less usable space that you would use in your day-to-day life. So you can put it under beds, you can put it in the back of a garage or somewhere like that you don't have to get to often, space that you're not using for other things. You can really kind of cram it away. And it takes the least amount of work. Actually, I already said that. Least work. Least work. I guess that was an important one to me when I wrote the list. The third point is you can eat whatever you want during your normal day-to-day life. Since you aren't cycling through your food stores, you can eat whatever you want on the day-to-day side of things, not take up a lot of space in your pantries, not have to have a shitload of food in your house that may be going bad or just taking up space or whatever. And you don't have to eat canned goods, don't have to eat dry goods. You can eat all fresh vegetables. So if you're on like a paleo diet or something like that, that may be very important to you. Or if you just really prefer fresh fruits and everything, fresh vegetables, meat, stuff like that, you're going to be able to do that and still have your preparations taken care of with that stuff that's socked away in the closet. So that can be a big advantage. Now, the cons of this side of prepping, or this method of prepping for your food, number one is that it costs a lot more. And that's probably the biggest disadvantage, because you're going to have to pay a lot more for that kind of food, and it's stuff that you're not eating on a day-to-day basis. So the most likely scenario is that it's all going to go to waste. When you get to the end of that shelf life, and, knock on wood, nothing crazy has happened in 20 years that would justify you breaking into your apocalypse food rations, you're not going to want to eat it then. It's going to be basically expired. So even if you did, you would have to eat it quickly. So most likely outcome is that most of the stuff is going to go to waste. And even if you donate it so that it doesn't go to waste physically, like it's used, maybe it doesn't go into a landfill, it's still not going to be used by you, so you wasted the money, if nothing else. So that goes into the cost a lot more as well. And number 3 on the cons is if you do end up having to cut into your food storage, it will drastically change your diet all of a sudden, like abruptly. So if there is a serious shit hit the fan scenario, EMP or whatever, economic collapse, and there's no food left in the grocery stores, and you say, all right, cool, we got this taken care of, and you got all your food, you busted out, you're going to have food, which is great, that's the main point. But it will require you to pretty significantly change your diet basically overnight, which is could add to the stressful situation that you're already in, could cause people to have some sort of random health issues. Probably not serious, as long as you know what you would be allergic to and not, but you could seriously feel pretty shitty to drastically alter your diet in an already stressful situation, especially if you were going from a lot of fresh stuff to a lot of super packed away, high shelf life foods that may have a lot of preservatives and other things in there, or just going from fresh vegetables and meats to a lot of beans and grains and rice and stuff like that could definitely cause you some problems. So nothing significantly bad, but it would not be a good thing, that's for sure, to drastically change your diet like that. And another thing about changing your diet is if you can't really dip into them on like a less severe situation without causing even more waste, because you can't crack open like a number 10 can of powdered eggs just to use it for a week and save some money, because that whole can then is not going to last for 10 or 15 more years. You'll have to use it all. So if you do need to dip into it all in a less severe shit hit the fan scenario, you're going to have to do it in bigger chunks. You're not going to be able to get a more variety. You won't be able to get eggs and rice and meat, because that would require opening like 3 different 5-gallon buckets or something, which then you would have to use all of it. So that's not really as much of an option, the little short-term dipping into your preps for less severe stuff. So for me personally, those are basically the pros and cons of the eat what you store and store what you eat, and the Ronco set it and forget it style of prepping. So most people have a pretty clear idea of what they like and don't like about each of those. Obviously, you can do a hybrid system. You can save a little bit of money if you want to do the Ronco method by storing your own food, packaging your own dry goods in buckets and stuff like that. So you don't necessarily have to do the commercially available packaged ones. But if your goal is not necessarily to save money, if you don't mind spending an extra $1,000 and you just really don't want to do any of the work, then that's certainly an option there too. What I will caution you on if you do choose the Ronco method is to check out actual calorie and nutrition requirements. Don't go by what the manufacturers bill as being the however many days that this is supposed to last. They are a lot better about it now with the prevalence of prepping and kind of mainstream attention that it's getting. There's a lot more options out there from quality companies, but in the past they would have like a 30-day supply of food, which would only really last 30 days if you use 900 calories a day or something like that. So you want to make sure that you're getting your sufficient number of calories, sufficient number of vitamins and minerals, and a sufficient what's it called? Just variety, I guess. And actually, one of those options would be the survival tabs that I just mentioned in the video I made. So you can buy the cheaper kind of, and that will save a lot of space too. You can buy the cheaper food storage packages, and this is especially applicable if you're going for 6 months or less, and then make up the calorie deficit that may be there with the survival tabs, which will take up very little space. If you're planning for like a year or more, you wouldn't want to try to make up huge calorie deficits simply with the tabs, but for 6 months or less, and if your packaged food storage plan has 1,200 calories in it, 1,500 calories a day is what you've planned for, and you just want to make up that extra with the survival tabs, I think that's a perfect use for them, for the survival tabs. So that's what I would recommend using those for. So for me personally, I've traditionally used and kind of encouraged people to use the store what you eat what you store. Mostly this was for the cost reason, and distant second for the not having to change your diet, getting to eat what you do on a normal basis, just buying more of it. You're able to slowly build up your stores. I guess that would be another pro that I left out, was that the money that you do have to spend in the store what you eat, you don't really have to spend it all at once. But you could, for the most part, you could do that with the other method too, but it's going to cost you a little more. The more you buy in bulk, the cheaper it is, but I guess that goes for both plans. But yeah, so traditionally that's what I've been using, and it's what I mostly use now. I do have some buckets of long-term rice stored, and I do have some dehydrated egg powder and other things stored long-term, but the plan was still, or I guess is still, to be totally accurate, to cycle through that stuff too. I use a lot of rice. I eat rice on a day-to-day basis, so I just crack open a 5-gallon bucket and eat out of that for as long as it takes to go through it. And rice and dry goods should last in that situation. They should, for the most part. So you're not really going to waste much. Now, but I'm sort of shifting to where I really am getting tired of the work that's involved with staying on top of the food rotation, and I'm also more and more shifting my diet to fresher stuff, more of a paleo type diet. I'm sick of eating canned stuff, and the rice really doesn't change because it's dry either way and you just cook it. But in terms of the vegetables and stuff like that, I really am more of a fan of the fresh stuff, and I'm also want to reclaim a lot more of my space in just unrelated lifestyle choices that are, have nothing to do with prepping. I'm trying to get rid of a lot of my shit, trying to make a move more towards minimalism, and just clear out my living space of everything that doesn't make my life better, and add value to my life in a direct and meaningful way. And so I just want to clear out space of everything, so I want to take up as little space as possible. And also, for most people, this probably doesn't apply as much to people who are just have that prepping mindset naturally because their minds are thinking like that, and I'm sort of in that camp. But I don't think it helps a lot of people to be constantly reminded of the fact that there's a possibility for shit hit the fan. So the more time you spend on prepping and any prepping related or preparedness related stuff, you're bringing that to the front of your mind. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. I don't think most people are going to get some sort of weird PTSD because of it or something. But I think it's very important to be able to just do what you need to do to be prepared and then move on with your life. And the more you have to deal with any aspect of preparedness, the harder that is. So it's probably easier for someone like me who just has that mindset than it would be for someone who doesn't ever normally think about that stuff and just wants to take care of it. But it's still there. That's still a factor. And that I don't want to just constantly have to be thinking about what ifs type situation, because that's something that we should be trying to get our minds to not really do, and just think about realistic possibilities and take care of them, but not be constantly going through these what ifs. And the more we're dealing with preparedness in any sense, the more that becomes just a thought process and just infects your mind. So that's another reason I'd like to get more of it in the back burner, because despite the channel and the videos and everything, and the fact that I'm interested in preparedness, it's not something that I'm necessarily really passionate about. Like, I don't necessarily enjoy having a big bunch of food storage in my house. I do it because I know it's necessary to eliminate what is a pretty significant risk. It's an easy way to really become self-sufficient and just take care of yourself in the situations that definitely could arise. I think it's just too likely for some of those stuff to happen at some point during your life to not take these steps. But that doesn't mean that I really enjoy doing all this stuff. I mean, obviously, and I think you're crazy if you don't agree with this, but obviously if I had some crystal ball and could look in the future and tell that nothing was going to happen in my lifetime, I would be relieved and get rid of all my prepping stuff. I wouldn't be like, oh man, no, I don't get to have all this cool gear. I would be like, oh, thank God, I can stop spending any time and money on something and just do whatever I actually enjoy doing, any stuff that I'm actually passionate about. And that's not to say that I hate or am disgruntled about the fact that I think I have to prepare, but it's not a passion of mine, you know what I mean? It's not something that I would do even if I didn't think I had to. I'm doing it just like I'm paying for my car insurance, and just like I do anything, or saving money, you know, to prepare for everything I do to prepare for the future. Obviously, if you knew somehow that you wouldn't have to save money, it'd be more fun to spend it all now. But that's just not the case, and that's the same thing with prepping. So I want to try to shift away probably from that, and from just having to spend more time and more effort and more space. And with the options now, like I mentioned before, there's a lot more options for prepping type supplies, food storage, and everything, because it has become a lot more popular. I think the cost difference is a lot less than it used to be. I think before, to really get enough calories in a long-term food storage plan that was commercially purchased, that you could just set it and forget it, would cost a lot more than buying and just cycling through food stores that you bought at the grocery store. But I don't think that's necessarily the case now, especially for stuff like 6 months, which is really what my plan is. I think maybe I would save $1,000, maybe not even. And when I look at the amount of space, and especially when you consider the money that I have in like can rotators and stuff like that, that cuts into that as well. So I'm going to probably do some calculations on that stuff and slowly start eating my food storage stuff without replacing it, like all the canned goods. And then when I get about halfway through it, probably buy a big chunk of commercially prepared stuff to complement my long-term stored food of rice and dry goods, and just buy some of the packaged vegetables and stuff like that to go with it. Because I still think it's a lot cheaper to package your own dry goods, because it's fairly easy, and stuff's so cheap to buy, like at Sam's, like rice and oats and stuff like that, that I don't think there's any reason to buy that type of stuff commercially, unless you just really don't feel like doing the work and you have money to spare. But it's harder to package stuff like vegetables and everything like that. So I'm probably going to buy that stuff packaged commercially, maybe freeze-dried and everything like that, especially the meat. And I'm going to cut down on the variety of stuff that I have. That was a big worry for me before, was that I was like, oh, you got to have a lot of variety of food, without really considering that I don't eat a lot of variety in my day-to-day life, so there's no point in trying to add in something that's not even there to begin with. Like, I don't eat one thing every day, all day, but I don't need to have more variety in my prepping stash than I do in my day-to-day life. In fact, you can usually get away with less, so I certainly don't need to have more. So I really don't need stuff beyond maybe like rice, oats, eggs, chicken, some seasonings, and some vegetables and fruits, like green beans, broccoli, whatever, and some fruits. That's all you need, especially the less amount of time that you're storing for, the less amount of variety you need. Anyway, obviously, if you had a week and for whatever reason you only thought you would need a week's worth of extra food, it could be anything. It could be just the survival tabs. It could be just rice. It could be just peanut butter. It could be pretty much anything. All you're talking about, you're not going to run out of vitamins in that short amount of time. And obviously, for 3 or 4 years, you're going to want to have a pretty good array of stuff, because you might get tired of it. You might get vitamin deficiencies, whatever. But for 3 months, 6 months, variety isn't going to be a huge concern, as long as you have a little bit. Maybe get some of these survival tabs to make sure you have no nutritional gaps, and then just get the stuff that you know you like and could eat for a few meals in a row without getting too sick of it. Buy it and stash it and stick it away. So obviously, without going rambling too much farther, both of these plans, the store what you eat what you store, and the Ronco set it and forget it method, as I call it, as I coined, both have merit. They're both great options as long as you're storing food. That's the important part, to make sure you have some resiliency in your life and are not completely helpless. But whichever one you choose, there's nothing wrong with that. So I think in the past I've kind of presented the store what you eat what you store as being just automatically superior of a method, which is not necessarily true. It's all about what your goals are and what your plan is. So let me know what you guys think and what you do specifically, if you use a hybrid of these, if you use one or the other, and why. And I appreciate you guys listening to the podcast, and stay tuned because I will be giving away some samples of those survival tabs that I've mentioned a few times. The last video that I made on the channel is about them, and they sent me some samples. I tried a few of them, and the chocolate and butterscotch flavors, I'm not a fan of those flavors in anything, so I'm not going to eat those, and I'm going to give away the samples. So stay tuned, and I'll figure out how I'm going to go about choosing a winner for that. It'll just probably be a random person who's on the Facebook page or something like that. So stay tuned, and that'll come up, and I appreciate you guys listening, and I will talk to you later.